You're listening to the UAE's #1 talk radio station.
This is Off Script
On Dubai Eye 103.8.
We're joined now by somebody who's setting out, unbelievably, to row the Pacific.
Yeah, we are. Yeah, this guy will be familiar to many of you listening as the host of the Guy in Dubai show. And he's taken his sense of adventure to a preposterous level because Paris Norriss is embarking on a scarcely conceivable mission, Sona Rapani, to row 4,800 kilometres, there or thereabouts, give or take the odd kilometre, across the Pacific Ocean, setting off from California, arriving in Hawaii. He leaves in June of this year and he joins us in studio now to tell us why this insane plan came literally across his bows. Paris, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Good to be here with you in the studio.
Okay, so, I mean, the obvious question, because we have had some experience dealing with these kind of epic rows on Off Script. We spoke to our good friend Toby Gregory, who recently rowed across the Atlantic, and he was a very driven individual, a guy that certainly had his reasons behind it. I mean, you need a really strong reason, don't you, to do something as daunting and as scary, quite frankly, as this. What was your reason, Paris?
Yeah, look, there's a lot of risk to these things. And I think, you have to have a huge sense of adventure and a desire for a human accomplishment, because it's quite pointless, really, unless you really enjoy the journey of it.
Yeah,
you don't.
In terms of getting from A to B, it's you could just fly.
There's better ways to do it, that's for sure. But what's interesting about this adventure we're going on through the Pacific is we're coming to an island called Kauai, which is the last island of Hawaii. And it's actually where the Polynesians first found Hawaii. So over 1,000 years ago, there were human beings without the boats that we have today, which have solar panels and desalination equipment. And we've got, food that's a bit like astronaut food from a company called Real Termat, and they didn't have all of that back then. They navigated with the stars. They had trade winds that would take them on, which were like their motorways through the Pacific. They would catch fish, and somehow they would capture water, and they managed to dominate and discover the whole of the Pacific Ocean, which, by the way, is a lot bigger than we often conceive it to be. It's bigger than all the land mass on the planet.
Yeah.
By not just a small amount, but by at least another whole North America. So it's really huge. If you turn the globe in one direction, you can actually, all you can see is Pacific Ocean. You know? So it's ginormous. We're not going the furthest way that we could possibly go. There are definitely other routes that could be further, but the route that we're going to Kauai has not yet been done before, which makes it interesting to us because it means there's a world record on the table for whoever does it the quickest.
There's the Talisker Whiskey Row. Is that the one? I assumed that was the one you're doing, but obviously not.
So that's the Atlantic Row,
right.
And it's the same organising committee called Atlantic Campaigns who are for the first time doing the Pacific version of that. So that's what we're taking part in.
I see.
How does the Pacific Row compare to people who have done an Atlantic Row before? What are some of the unique challenges that you'll face in the Pacific?
I think the biggest challenge that's maybe a little bit unique to the Atlantic is the current directions and some of the weather. The weather is bad also in the Atlantic. There's no nice side to it, but it can get, when it gets really bad in the Pacific, it gets really bad. Also, the currents are a little less simple. They go in a more circular motion. So when we take off from Monterey in California, we'll have 500 kilometers of side waves, which could knock your boat over in cold water. So it's about 12 degrees water, which is, pretty nippy if you fall in. And we've got effectively 500 nautical miles that we have to get through, which will be similar conditions to sort of rowing around the UK. And then we come into tropical waters where it suddenly gets humid. We get huge waves. And the great thing about the waves is if they're going in the right direction, you can surf them. So you'll be absolutely flying. But if they're in the wrong direction, you've got a zigzag. So it's
not a straight line, 4,800 kilometers.
No, not at all.
It's a zigzaggy one.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing that's also extremely interesting, and this is part of the reason why we're doing this, is the wildlife. So we're on the same route as 6 whale migrations. where we take off in Monterey, there's sea lions and penguins. There's going to be sharks galore, dolphins, blue marlin, and we're doing this to raise awareness and money for the Blue Marine Foundation to support conserving the oceans, because they've got a plan to conserve 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. And we want to bring to life what is out there, because I haven't yet met anybody who can really say that they've been that close to the Pacific. I mean, maybe they've been on the coast, but who's actually really been deep into the Pacific and can touch the water, you know?
Well,
so,
only 81 people, Paris, I've read. Given that over 6,000 have climbed Mount Everest, only 81 have rowed across the Pacific. So you're not even going to be hitting three figures when you guys cross the Pacific. That is an incredibly exclusive club.
It is a very
and there's three
club.
more of you. I want to know more about your crewmates, because clearly those need to be carefully selected.
Yes,
you got to get along very well with these individuals if you're going to be putting yourself under that level of kind of stress for such a prolonged period of time. So who are you rowing with?
Yeah, so our team is called Brothers N Oars, and it was set up by two brothers, Ollie Amos and Harry Amos. And Harry Amos lives here in Dubai, and we train together. Ollie Amos was my buddy at school when I was at Millfield. He was in my boarding house. He was about 4 years younger than me, so I remember sort of putting him to bed and telling him to shut up when we were teenagers. And we reunited out here in Dubai, and continued our friendship. And the fourth rower, Barney Lewis, was a good friend of his at school and has become a friend of mine also. So we all go back quite a long way. And I think our team cohesion, as far as I can see from everything we've been doing, has been fantastic. We have a really great time together. But things can change when you're under the immense amount of stress and exhaustion and sleep deprivation of rowing an ocean. So let's see how long it is until we fall out with each other.
And it's actually a race. This is not just something you're doing for, participation, let's say.
No, it's a race. We're taking it very seriously. We've been training for the last 2 years. We have a coach called Gus Barton who's trained 10 world record winning teams. We've been taking advice from every team we can in order to figure out how to do this, because unlike some other teams, we're complete novices. When our boat arrived here in Dubai, we hadn't even rowed across a river. None of the four of us have ever rowed across a river. We've now clocked 200 hours each on the boat, and a huge amount of time on the rowing machine and in the gym. So we've certainly built up the physical side, but I think what people quite often don't realize is there's a huge amount of logistics that goes into this. So just getting to the start line is probably 80% of the work. So, we have to get a huge amount of equipment. We have to make sure that equipment is the lightest we could possibly find, because, you don't want a heavy boat. We have to learn a huge amount about sea survival, navigation, first aid, because when we're out there, we've got no help. There's no side boat or anything like that, and even the closest tanker or the closest path is further away than the guys on the space station. So we're really very remote there and have to be self-sufficient.
Yeah, there's we've talked about this on the show. These are the kind of random facts we come up with on off script, but there's a place called Point Nemo, which is closer to the ISS than it is to the nearest land point. I'm not sure whether you guys are rowing over there, but that just gives you a kind of appreciation of the vastness of the Pacific Ocean.
Absolutely. So Point Nemo is the most remote place on Earth, and we will be just north of that,
right,
but within the same kind of
neighborhood,
if you like. And yeah, so it's a long way from anywhere.
All right, I've got loads of questions, Paris. You can obviously train. You're a very fit guy. You can be prepared physically, but there's certain things that you cannot, or at least you can prepare yourself at least on paper. But it's only when you get on that boat and then you start the row that you're going to have to deal with those things. And I'm thinking about swells of the ocean, bad weather. Also things that I couldn't ever possibly deal with, like the cramped conditions in the cabin. Going to the toilet, these kind of rudimentary things that we sort of always take for granted, you guys are going to have to, go to some levels of extremes. Can you kind of talk about that?
Yeah, so one of the things we've been talking about is the fact that everybody on the boat has a different tolerance to risk. And some people might find things critical and say that we need to go into an emergency situation, while others might think that it's okay to continue. So we have to figure out what is the decision process when we're in that scenario, because it might be that we're in a hurricane, and when hurricanes get too bad, what we need to do is put ourselves in the cabins, and before we do that, we throw out something called the power anchor, which is a bit like a parachute that goes underwater, which holds us steady. And that's effectively the way to sort of weather a storm. But obviously, you're not making any progress forward. So if you're in race mode, you want to keep rowing. But of course, there's a safety issue as well. So we have to figure out, what if someone says, "Look, guys, we have to put the power anchor out," and the others say, "Well, I think we can continue." Like, who do you listen to? And we've figured out in that scenario that we should always listen to the person who's got the lowest risk tolerance, because they might know something we don't. But also, you can't force somebody into doing something.
Just guessing you've got the highest risk tolerance here. I'm
I've
just
certainly
surmising that from the way you've described that. You're like, yeah, guys, we need to keep up with the guys in front. We need to keep rowing.
I think I've definitely got one of the highest risk tolerances, but there's definitely some guys in my team who are a bit crazy.
Right.
So Harry, who I train with all the time, a very well put together, charming guy. And has been in the army for many years, but I've learned his risk tolerance is about as high as mine as well. So,
right.
Okay. I mean, in terms of the ways to go about this, you've mentioned that you have an experienced trainer who's taking you through the process. Is there sort of a tried and tested, this is what everybody does in terms of the day-to-day? For example, when we spoke to Toby, who was rowing the Atlantic, they had kind of 2 hours rowing, 2 hours off, and had this kind of structure that they would go through. Do people go about this in different ways, or is everybody kind of going through the same day-to-day process?
Right. So there is a sort of tried and tested method, and very much similar to what you just said there. So if you want to learn how to do this, you can copy everybody else and you can get across. But if you want to win, then you have to do something different. So you have to come up with new strategies. You have to figure out how to be more competitive. So if everybody's doing 2 hours on, 2 hours off, everybody's rowing for 12 hours. So what if you row for 14 hours? What if you throw in an extra 2? And now all your teammates throwing in an extra 2. So we've got another 8 hours being rowed by an extra person. You're going to have a competitive advantage. So if you want to win, you've got to see every way to get a competitive advantage. It could be through your food. It could be through the hours you row. It could be your sleep pattern. It could be how you manage to lose unneeded weight on the boat. So we've spent, I don't know how many hours looking at our anchor, because we've got this metal anchor that we know we're never going to be able to use anywhere in the Pacific. So it's just dead weight, but we have to have it by regulations. So it's like, how do we lose weight on the anchor? So I've come up with looking at every word of
Like an F1 team.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're looking at the rules and looking at each word and looking at the definitions of those words to go, hang on a minute. It doesn't say we need a 5 kilogram anchor. It says we need an anchor with the same load as a 5 kilogram anchor. So we might be able to find one with the same strength. And so we're then trying to figure out how we can lose weight on the anchor and all sorts of things like this. So there's many ways that you can be more competitive.
And in terms of the boat as well, Paris, give me a kind of idea of the dimensions of it, and how did you guys fund it, source it, etc., build it?
Yeah, it's fantastic. So it's a 7.5 meter boat, about 2 meters wide. It's a carbon fiber hull, so that's a little bit lighter than a fiberglass hull. So that's, again, another way that you could be a bit more competitive. It's got everything you need in terms of navigation equipment, GPS, VHF radio, satellite telephones, solar panels, and a water maker built into it. It's built by a company called Rannoch Adventures, and they are basically about 90% of the boats that race across the Atlantic, for example. So that's they've kind of cornered the market in terms of the boats. And in terms of funding it, I think that's a really interesting area, because what we have understood from day zero is this is much more about logistics. And it's not just about rowing. It's, okay, how do we raise money for charity? How do we create social media buzz around it? And we're even doing a documentary around this as well. And then how do we fund all of that? Because that's a lot more expensive to fund than just buying a boat and buying the things you need and crossing the ocean. So you might be surprised it costs close to about 1.5 million dirhams doing what we're doing.
Wow.
And so we need corporate sponsorship. So we have pitched to every man and his dog around Dubai, and we have had some great sponsors support us, our platinum sponsors, Legatum Fund and the DIFC, and they were very interested in supporting this because they have 3 philanthropic funds, and they saw the alignment with what we're doing around charity and ocean conservation, and saw that as something that they were not just like the exposure of, but sort of the way that they're getting the exposure, the alignment. And we've got I think our list of sponsors might be topping maybe 25 now. So
wow.
we've really done a very good job of that, but we've still got some room for a couple more, which we're hoping to close in the next 2 months.
Paris, this doesn't sound like a lot of fun. When you describe a cabin that you're going to be staying in that's coffin-like, when you describe having to deal with some of these swells, some of the food that you're going to have to deal with as well, why are you doing this?
Well, there's a few reasons, but I think me and my teammates, we're people who love a good adventure, and there's definitely some nice sides to this adventure. I mean, we're on the same route as 6 whale migrations. We're going to see some unbelievable marine life. We're going to see sunsets and sunrises like we've never seen them before. It's going to be a night sky clearer than we've ever seen before. We're going to come into the island of Kauai, and seeing that, it's the same place where they filmed Jurassic Park, is that epic sort of volcanic landscape. So that's going to be amazing. And I think we've all got a couple of sort of internal motivations, which maybe are the reason why we do these things. So Harry in particular, he was inspired when he was in the army in Afghanistan. There was an accident that happened which left one of his soldiers without legs. And that same soldier managed within 365 days, he rode the Atlantic Ocean with no legs, a guy called Royce MBE. And that inspired Harry and Ollie also, that they wanted to do this particular thing, and it was Ollie's idea actually to put this together. I myself, I long time ago, I had to look after somebody who had a terminal illness, and I watched every morning how as she knew that she was getting closer to the end, she prayed longer and longer, and I saw, in the morning she'd pray up to an hour, and I thought, Paris, don't wait till it's too late, till you start to realize that it's time to discover the world and do things you want to. And so these things are underlying all of our team's sort of sense of adventure and to live for now and to experience things. And so I don't know if we'll ever be able to have the same feeling that we've really been able to hold the whole globe in our hand quite like this. So for us, this is fun.
That is pretty compelling, I would say, as a reason, very well articulated as well. And obviously the causes that you're rowing for, we know it's well documented what's going on when it comes from an environmental point of view with plastic in the oceans and all of that kind of thing. Blue Marine Foundation. Can you kind of quickly talk about how, or kind of what work that foundation is doing to try to, make an impact?
Yeah, so one of the biggest sort of global disasters at the moment is the fact right in the middle of the North Pacific is an area that's called the Pacific Trash Dump, where the plastics from around the world that have been littered into water have effectively collected in this area the size of Texas. Now people are looking to see what they can do to clear this up, because it's obviously a huge tragedy in terms of what's happening with the marine life, and it's a lot of turtles are trying to eat these things and dying because of it. So they're doing a number of really inspiring projects to clear that up. Some really impressive social entrepreneurs that have come up with technologies to clear that up, who need funding and need a vehicle to do that, and the Blue Marine Foundation can help with that. And I think also it's what's happening at the policy level. So, intergovernmental agreements. So just recently, in fact, whilst we've been doing this this endeavor and raising money for the Blue Marine Foundation, knowing that their goal has been to conserve 30% of the world's oceans by 2030. There's recently been a bilateral agreement, a multilateral agreement upon countries to actually do that, which means to stop fishing in those areas, to limit shipping routes through those areas, and effectively to protect them. Because if you can conserve 30% of the world's oceans and allow the marine life to regenerate, then it actually regenerates all of the world's oceans, because it's enough that they can spread and start, regenerating in other areas.
And Paris, you already have your Guy in Dubai show. I imagine you have the cameras set up in studio here. How are you going to be documenting this for people who want to follow? And where can they follow you on social media as well?
Yes, so nothing that we do ever goes without being filmed. So as you know, so I've been filming adventure TV shows now for 5 years, with Guy in Dubai shows now on Dubai One and Amazon Prime and all the airlines. We've been filming a travel show version called Guy in the Sky, which is under production at the moment. And I thought with this particular row, we're going to do a series based around mega challenges like this. So this is the first of one, and maybe at some point I'll come and speak to you about my next one. But we're going to have to film on the boat without a crew. So I'm in charge of that. And it's a little bit complicated because we have the elements against us. So the seawater likes to corrode everything. We have to try and figure out how we're going to do this without, getting seawater into our chips, which, has all the data on. Also, some of the best elements of what we want to film are the things that are unexpected, like a whale popping up or a boat capsizing or something like that happening. So I've designed a way to film almost in a sort of CCTV camera-like way, where when something happens and I press stop, it will save the last 20 minutes so that we've got just that section. So I've sort of designed how we're going to film this and get the best footage we can. And also, I think what we're trying to do within our documentary is not show people how to row across the Pacific. And I'm not really interested in doing things in the same tone as many of these adventure shows, which are very much sort of like, day 45, I haven't eaten, and look at what a hero I am, because I sort of believe like
the beard's coming on splendidly.
Yeah, exactly. When we've got razors if we want to use them, but it's we've brought this on ourselves. I don't want to sort of
not Bear Grylls.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we've put ourselves in this situation,
Yeah.
So I want to show the camaraderie and the fun that four guys are going to have, and the other side of that, the breakdowns, and when we don't get on. And I really want to focus it around the bond between four old friends trying to do this, because I think if you look at any successful TV show, whether it's Friends or the Kardashians, or even if you look at the Titanic, which might be more relevant, or not, hopefully. It's all about the bond between humans that actually made those shows interesting to people. And I think that's what we're going to try and do with this one.
Paris, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. We could have you on for another 2 hours, so we're going to have you back in before you actually set off on your journey. But thanks so much.
Please do.
For spending the time and for telling us what you're getting up to.
Thank you.
Dubai Eye 103.8.
Join the conversation.